The badge scanner blinked red. Again, Daniel West pressed it once more, slower this time, bracing it with both hands. The tremor in his left arm made the plastic lanyard rattle against his chest. Beep. Red. Behind him, the glass doors whooshed open for two interns he had mentored last summer. They didn't look at him. Maybe they didn't recognize him anymore. Or maybe they were told not to. Daniel stood there, just a foot from the lobby, one foot still dragging slightly from the stroke that nearly killed him 3 weeks ago. He turned toward the front desk. Marcus, the security guard, a guy he'd exchanged Monday morning banter with for nearly 18 years, shifted in his seat, eyes flicking toward the screen and back again. There's something wrong with my badge, Daniel said. System glitch, maybe? Marcus stood slowly, walked over, then leaned in like he was about to share a secret. His voice dropped. They revoked your access last Thursday. They didn't tell you. Daniel felt his heart pound against his ribs. Last Thursday, he'd still been in the hospital then, slurring words and learning to walk in a straight line again. No memo. Marcus added, apologetic. No call. They didn't want to deal with the fallout. Daniel stepped back, staring through the frosted glass of the building that used to be his second home. HR walked by. She saw him. She kept walking. No eye contact. No wave. No goodbye. Just silence. Just erasure. 15 years. Gone like a deleted file. And in that moment, standing in the cold Chicago wind, Daniel made a decision. He wasn't going to disappear quietly, because while they were busy pretending he never existed, Daniel still had access to something far more dangerous than a badge. Receipts. And he was going to bring their entire empire down with them. It was the kind of cold that crept past layers, the bitter kind that sank into your fingertips no matter how tightly you clutch your coffee cup. The wind along Wabash Avenue whipped Daniel's coat open like it had a grudge, and the snowflakes didn't fall. They attacked. But none of it mattered. What chilled Daniel West wasn't the Chicago weather. It was the silence. The badge in his hand had been a kind of ritual. For almost 2 decades, he had swiped it across that scanner at 6:47 a.m. sharp, Monday through Friday, rain or snow, before the coffee machine had even finished its first brew. The sound it made, beep, green light, click, was as much a part of his routine as the black coffee he nursed while pulling compliance reports. It was a symbol of entry, of purpose, of belonging. But today, beep, red, access denied. He didn't panic at first. His thumb had twitched, left hand still sluggish from the stroke. Maybe he hadn't positioned it right. Maybe the scanner was just cold. He steadied his fingers against the badge's edge and tried again. Beep. Red. Again. Denied. Daniel stood motionless, the chill now rising from somewhere deeper than his coat. Behind him, a pair of junior analysts brushed past, their badges lighting the scanner with that warm green hue like always. Neither looked at him. Maybe they didn't notice. Maybe they did and chose not to. He watched the doors sigh open for them like obedient gates. He turned slowly, not wanting to believe what his gut had already begun to understand. Marcus, he said, voice quiet, cracked at the edge. The security guard looked up, eyes catching Daniel's for a second before darting back to the monitor. Marcus had been here nearly as long as Daniel had. Used to crack corny jokes every Monday about Daniel's caffeine addiction. Used to call him Mr. West like it was a Secret Service title. But today there was no smile. No joke. Only stillness. Daniel approached slowly. There's something wrong with my badge. Can you check the system? Marcus hesitated. His hand hovered over the keyboard. Then, almost too softly to hear, he said, they pulled your clearance last week. Daniel's heart dropped. What? That's not possible. I've been on medical leave. I notified HR. They didn't send anything official. Marcus cut in. No memo. No list. Just told us to deny entry if the system flagged red. I thought they'd at least call you. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. They didn't. I didn't even know I was gone. Behind the desk, the monitor glowed with his name in faded gray. Daniel West. Status, inactive. Reason, internal, no return. No return. The words hit harder than they had any right to. Not terminated, not resigned, just erased. Daniel stepped back, legs wobbling slightly. Not from a stroke, not from the wind, from something heavier. He turned, glancing through the glass into the lobby. The same potted plants still stood by the elevators. The same framed mission statement about valuing our people still hung crooked on the wall. But he was no longer part of the frame. Then he saw her, Christine, from HR. She was walking past, phone in hand, the same mechanical stride she always had. She saw him. He knew she did. Their eyes met, just for a flicker of a moment. And then, she looked down at her screen and turned a corner. Daniel stood in the entryway, the glass door still shut before him, his badge limp in his hand. The wind cut against the back of his neck, making him flinch. 15 years, 18-hour workdays, covering for his team, building protocols, surviving reorganizations, late-night Zooms, giving more than he ever took. And this was it. No goodbye, no warning, just a locked door. He didn't know how long he stood there, watching his familiar faces pass, pretending not to see him. 5 minutes, maybe 20. Long enough for the coffee to go cold in his hand. Long enough for the snow to begin crusting around his shoes. And then, finally, he turned and walked away. Slowly, deliberately, his shoulder hunched just slightly against the wind. He didn't cry, didn't scream, but something inside him, the part that had once been content to give everything to a company, snapped. It wasn't rage, not yet, but it was close. As he reached the corner, the badge still clutched tight in his hand, Daniel West looked up toward the tower he had helped build from the inside. And he said only one thing, under his breath, to no one but the sky. You're not getting away with this. It started the same way it always did. A Tuesday morning, calendar jammed from 8:15 a.m. until the kind of hour that made the janitor sigh when he saw your lights still on. Daniel West had never been one to complain. He had come up in the old school. The first to clock in, the last to leave, the guy who skipped lunch so the quarterly report could hit inboxes before the CEO even poured his first cup of artisan roast. The day had begun like any other. His outlook reminded him of 5 back-to-back compliance reviews, a vendor escalation call, and a late-night projection meeting with leadership. The spreadsheet was already open before he'd even taken a bite of the protein bar that sat, half unwrapped, next to his third cup of bitter, burnt break-room coffee. He should have known something was wrong. The signs had been there. Nagging fatigue, tingling in his left fingertips, the kind of brain fog that made cell formulas blur together. But in the world he lived in, weakness wasn't an excuse. You powered through. You caffeinated, concentrated, calibrated. You didn't say, I need a break. Because breaks were for people who hadn't built compliance frameworks from the ground up. By the time the 6:30 p.m. Zoom call began, the office was mostly dark. The winter sun had vanished behind the skyline 2 hours earlier, and only the glow of his monitor painted the walls. He sat alone in a sea of cubicles, the open floor plan once designed for collaboration, now echoing back only the click of his mouse. The screen lit up with the cold face of Lawrence Kane, the CEO of Neurovalis. Hair perfect, jawline sharp, eyes like polished ice. He didn't even greet Daniel. Margins are down, Lawrence barked, voice crackling through the cheap speaker. I need the Q1 model revised. First thing tomorrow. Daniel blinked, surprised. That's not feasible, Lawrence. The team's been working 80-hour weeks. They're stretched thin. If we push again tonight. Don't make this emotional, Daniel. The voice came flat, without breath. Just get it done. Then the screen went black. No goodbye. No acknowledgement. Just off. Daniel stared at the empty rectangle. His right hand was still on the mouse. His back stiff from 12 unmoving hours. The spreadsheet in front of him swam slightly. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the vent coughed warm air that didn't seem to reach his fingertips. Then the pain hit, a sudden, slicing light behind his left eye. Sharp, bright, and merciless. At first, he thought it was just a migraine. God knows he'd had enough. But then, when he tried to stand, his left leg didn't answer. His foot twisted underneath him, and he stumbled into the corner of his desk. His left arm hung like a rope, limp and unresponsive. Words formed in his brain, logical and urgent. Call someone. Something's wrong. Help. But none of them made it out. His mouth moved, but sound didn't follow. His vision tilted. He could still hear the whirring of the HVAC, the hum of electricity through the ceiling lights, but it all sounded distant, like he was underwater. He tried to reach for his phone, but his hand slid off the desk uselessly. There was no one left in the building. The interns had long gone. IT had gone dark. Only Daniel remained. As the wave of dizziness pulled him downward, he collapsed onto the office floor. Face first, cheek against industrial carpet. His eyes, still open, caught the edge of a stack of quarterly reports he'd signed the night before. In the corner of his vision, the company logo flickered on the edge of a recycled binder. Neurovalis, moving humanity forward. The irony might have made him laugh if he could feel his lungs. Instead, he lay there, trapped inside a body that had stopped listening to him, while the fluorescent lights overhead flickered and the cursor on his screen blinked in rhythm with his slowing heartbeat. Then, darkness. He awoke to the high-pitched beep of hospital monitors and the sterile brightness of recovery room lighting. A nurse with kind eyes adjusted a drip line and turned to him with practiced compassion. "You had a stroke, Mr. West. A mild one, but it was close. You've been unconscious for 2 days." His mouth was dry. His head throbbed. His left side tingled in strange, alien ways. It took him 4 tries to ask the question, "What time is it?" The nurse squeezed his hand. "You're safe now." But Daniel didn't feel safe. His eyes darted to the table beside him, where his phone now buzzed silently. Screen filled with missed calls, Slack messages, meeting invites, and one unopened email at the very top. Subject, employment status notification. Sent, 6:47 p.m., the same night his body gave out. He didn't need to open it. Not yet. He knew what it would say. They hadn't even waited 30 minutes. The email sat there like a brick on his chest. Unopened, unfeeling, and far too timely. Subject line, employment status notification. Timestamp, 6:47 p.m., Tuesday night. Daniel West stared at the screen in disbelief, the hospital bed creaking under his weight as he shifted his stiff body upright for the first time in days. His arm, still numb and sluggish, trembled as he gripped the phone with both hands. He had collapsed sometime around 6:30 p.m. The timestamp was impossibly precise, insultingly so. For a moment, he just sat there in the sterile quiet, the only sound the slow, measured beeping of his heart monitor. Outside the window, Chicago's skyline blinked against the dusky horizon, business as usual, unbothered by the private implosion of one of its loyal cogs. He didn't want to open the email. He already knew what it said, but he needed to see it, needed it to be real. His thumb tapped the screen. "Dear Mr. West, as of today, Neurovalis will initiate a formal review of your employment status due to non-response during active workflow cycles and unapproved absenteeism. This communication serves as the first and final notice of performance-related concern under the terms of your current contract. Regards, Human Resources Department, Neurovalis Inc. No name, no signature, no warmth, just text, calculated, dry, weaponized bureaucracy." Daniel blinked, trying to process it. He was in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, a catheter in his arm, a band around his wrist, his mobility still incomplete. They had access to everything: his calendar, his system logins, his Slack messages, his last Zoom recording. Surely someone had noticed the abrupt disconnect. He hadn't just gone silent. He had collapsed. He had nearly died. And yet, here was his consequence. A digital reprimand, issued not even an hour after he'd hit the floor. His mouth dried. His tongue stuck to the roof of it. His pulse, still fragile from the stroke, thudded a little harder. He tilted the phone away, unable to look at the screen anymore, and turned instead to the ceiling. A blank canvas of perforated tiles, humming with invisible air systems. In that moment, something inside him broke. Not like the blood vessel that had betrayed him a few nights ago, not like the nerve endings that now refused to respond with proper timing, but something deeper, something emotional, structural. It was the quiet cracking of trust. For 15 years, Daniel had bled for that company. He'd work holidays, cancel vacations, pulled all-nighters to prepare policy revisions that other people took credit for. He'd cleaned up other people's messes, bridged departments, trained interns who became directors, and put out fires nobody even knew were burning. He was the go-to, the steady hand, the guy who always got it done without complaint. But none of that mattered. One medical emergency, and they'd filed him under liability. He felt hollow. The nurse returned, wheeling a blood pressure monitor. "You okay, hon? You're a little flushed." Daniel nodded slowly, the motion tight and stiff at the neck. "Yeah, just got an email." She glanced at the screen, saw the expression on his face, and said nothing. Just tightened the Velcro cuff around his arm and let the machine do its work. After she left, Daniel opened his laptop, still slow in motion but clear in purpose. His hands moved across the keyboard like he was typing through cement, but he managed to send an email. It was short, polite, professional, directed to HR. "Dear team, I am currently recovering in a hospital after a medical emergency. I was unable to respond to communications as I was unconscious. Please confirm the receipt of this message and advise next steps regarding my employment status. Respectfully, Daniel West, Director of Compliance, Neurovalis Inc." He hit send and waited. No bounce back, no auto-reply, just silence. The following morning, he tried again. A second email, then a phone call, straight to voicemail. He waited another few hours, then tried his direct manager. Another voicemail, then Slack. The message showed delivered, but never read. It wasn't an oversight. He was being ghosted. And that, more than the stroke, more than the email, was what truly sent the spike through his chest. It wasn't just that they had fired him. It was that they had erased him. Quietly, cleanly, like a line item that no longer served its cost-to-value ratio. The company that once sent him fruit baskets for winning compliance audits now pretended he didn't exist. And as he stared out the window, watching the snow begin to fall across the skyline, Daniel knew something with terrifying clarity. This wasn't incompetence. It was design. And if they wanted to pretend he was invisible, he'd give them something impossible to ignore. The hardest part wasn't the silence. It was the slow, dawning realization that the silence was deliberate. For 2 days after that email, Daniel stayed in that hospital bed, recovering, breathing, waiting. Each morning, the nurses helped him shuffle a little farther down the hallway, his left leg dragging just slightly, his shoulders still stiff. His speech came back in fragments, first raspy, then clearer, though never quite as fast as it once had been. His body was healing, but the weight in his chest didn't come from the stroke. It came from the quiet, from what wasn't happening. There were no apologies, no follow-ups, no human response at all, just algorithms and HR templates and the kind of passive cruelty that lets you think, for a moment, maybe it's all a mistake. So Daniel, ever the professional, gave him the benefit of the doubt. He sat upright in bed, propped against a pillow, laptop open on his knees, and typed his second follow-up email, short, direct, neutral in tone. He included his case number from the hospital, attached a PDF of the stroke report. He even included a note from his physician verifying the date and severity of the incident. He hit send, then waited. Nothing. He waited until 4 p.m., then called again. This time, he dialed 3 different extensions at Neurovalis. HR, payroll, his old department, all rang out. One went to voicemail. One simply disconnected. The third had a pre-recorded message. This number is no longer accepting inbound calls. By the end of the day, he knew. They weren't coming. That night, he stared at the ceiling for a long time, the pale hospital light casting angular shadows across the floor. Somewhere down the hall, a heart monitor beeped, slow and steady. It echoed like a metronome of waiting, of not being answered. Daniel opened his laptop again and typed one more email. This one longer, less polished. His hands trembled slightly as he typed. Not from a stroke this time, but from something rawer. To whom it may concern, I am reaching out, again, regarding the abrupt change in my employment status. I have not received any communication beyond an auto-generated notice. I am recovering from a confirmed medical emergency that occurred during working hours on company premises. At the time of the incident, I was fulfilling my duties as Director of Compliance. I had not been informed of any prior performance concerns, disciplinary measures, or formal warnings. I would appreciate a response, clarification, or a single acknowledgement that I am not screaming into the void. Sincerely, Daniel West. He hit send. Nothing came back. The next day, he tried something different. He reached out to people. Real people. Not titles. Not apartments. He opened Slack and messaged Angela, the policy writer he'd mentored for years. They'd shared endless 2 a.m. back and forths on deadline nights, laughing about comma placements and sarcasm-proof policy tone. His message was casual, just a check-in, a light ping. It showed delivered. Never read. He stared at the icon for a long time. Then tried Martin, his old cross-department analyst. Same result. Then Lena, from finance. Then Victor, the guy who fixed the network printer every week without being asked. All delivered. None read. No replies. The silence was too synchronized to be accidental. It hit him like a slow burn spreading from his spine. He wasn't just being ignored. He was being erased. He wasn't a risk to manage anymore. He was a threat to contain. He stared at his inbox again, where his last message sat in limbo. The subject line felt like a plea. His cursor blinked in the draft box of another unsent email, waiting, blinking like a pulse of futility. The next morning, a nurse wheeled in his breakfast and noticed the tension in his face. Rough night. Daniel nodded. She said gently, a lot of people think the worst part of stroke is the body. But it's the aftermath that breaks you. The world doesn't pause for you to catch up. He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. She smiled faintly, set the tray down, and left. Alone again, Daniel looked out the window at the city beyond. Buildings standing tall like the company he'd once given everything to. The skyline didn't care. Tom didn't care. And clearly, neither did Neurovalis. But he cared. And that, he realized, was enough to make the next move. If they were going to ghost him like a dirty secret, if they were going to pretend he never mattered, then he would find a way to make his silence louder than their lies. It happened on a Thursday morning, the kind of gray, overcast day where even the sun seemed hesitant to show up. Daniel had barely slept. The pain in his shoulder had ebbed to a dull ache, but the stiffness in his body remained, and so did the weight in his chest, that strange heaviness born not from physical trauma, but from a deeper kind of dislocation. It was the pain of no longer belonging to the place that had defined your identity for almost 2 decades. The pain of being made invisible. He was flipping through a physical therapy pamphlet, something about breathing exercises and balance training, but his eyes weren't on the page. His mind had drifted again, back to the badge that didn't beep, the email that came too soon, and the way Christine from HR had looked right through him like he was nothing more than glass. Then she walked in, not as a sign nurse, Carla, if he remembered the name right. She was young, early 30s maybe, dressed in the same soft blue scrubs as the rest of the staff, but with a kind of careful quiet about her. She didn't speak right away, just rolled in the vitals cart and began her routine. Blood pressure, oxygen levels, reflex checks. Standard. But her hands lingered just a second longer on the cuff, her eyes flicking to the door before returning to his. You worked at Neurovalis, right? She asked casually, too casually, as if she were testing whether he would confirm or correct. Daniel blinked. Yeah, he said, voice hoarse from disuse. 15 years. She nodded once. My brother did too. Finance. Left last year. Not exactly by choice. Daniel straightened slightly in bed. His heart rate monitor ticked just a bit faster. Carla reached into her scrub pocket and pulled something out. Small, black, unmarked. A flash drive. Left with this, she said, voice barely above a whisper. He didn't tell me what was on it. Just said if anything ever happened to him, or someone like him, I should give it to them. She extended it toward him, pinched between 2 fingers like it might burn her. Daniel stared at it for a long second, unsure whether to take it or ask why. His fingers twitched slightly as he reached for it. Why me? He asked quietly, the question almost rhetorical. Carla looked at him, and for the first time that morning, her face cracked open into something that wasn't just professional concern. It was anger buried beneath politeness. But there. Because what they did to you, she said, wasn't right. She didn't wait for a reply. Just turned and walked out, the door whispering closed behind her. Daniel sat frozen for a long time, staring at the drive. It looked so innocent, so ordinary, But in his hand, it felt like a grenade, pin-pulled, silent, waiting. Back in his apartment 3 days later, the first time he had slept in his own bed since the stroke, Daniel finally plugged it into his old laptop. He sat at the kitchen table, a mug of decaf cooling beside him, the city humming faintly outside his window. The flash drive came to life with a soft click, and a folder opened on the screen. Dozens of files, labeled by department, by quarter, by report type. He clicked on the one named 2023 Q4 Workforce Risk Assessment.pdf. The report was dense. Pages of charts, coded tags, color-coded heat maps. At first glance, it looked like any other internal resource planning document. But as he scanned the pages, Daniel's pulse began to rise. It wasn't just about productivity metrics. It was about people. Each employee was categorized by a numeric risk score. Tier 1, stable, low cost. Tier 4, high insurance burden, declining efficiency, potential health-related disruption. His name was there. Employee ID 004219. Daniel West, Director, Global Compliance. Tier 4, status, flagged, evaluate exit strategy if workload impact continues. The words hit harder than he expected. They had seen the signs. The fatigue, the hours, the late-night Slack messages. They had tracked it, documented it, and instead of addressing it, offering support, adjustment, compassion, they had prepared to eliminate him. Coldly, quietly, he scrolled further. Dozens of other names followed, most of them over 50, most of them Tier 3 or Tier 4. Several were flagged with tiny red exclamation marks. He didn't know what those meant, not exactly, but he had a guess. Risks, liabilities, people too expensive to keep. He leaned back in his chair. The room around him was too quiet, too still. Outside, New York carried on like it always did, indifferent to the truth one man had just uncovered in a dim apartment. Daniel looked back at the laptop. This wasn't an isolated decision. It wasn't a slip-up. It was a system. And now, thanks to a nurse with a quiet voice and a brother who had seen too much, he had the receipts. He had proof that what happened to him wasn't personal. It was procedural. They had tried to erase him. But now, he was going to write himself back into the story. He didn't sleep that night. Not even a little. The flash drive remained plugged into the side of his battered laptop like a foredrip of rage, feeding him page after page of cold, unfeeling documentation. It wasn't just the Q4 workforce risk report anymore. That was only the beginning. Inside the nested folders, carefully labeled, meticulously archived, was an entire ecosystem of quiet elimination. Daniel scrolled deeper, clicking through reports with dry, innocuous names like operational cost forecast and human capital optimization strategy. But their contents weren't strategic, they were surgical. Clean language, clinical logic, ruthless implication. One spreadsheet listed employees by cost-to-benefit ratio, with factors like insurance premium delta, age-related productivity decline, and reassignment resistance level. Another document marked a dozen names. People he knew, people he had eaten lunch with, as transition viable, with notes like no dependents, limited internal visibility, and likely to accept severance if framed as performance-based. The deeper he went, the colder the documents became. This wasn't reactive. It wasn't management dealing with unforeseen strain. It was a plan. He clicked on a folder named Compliance Insights, Confidential Internal. Inside was a PDF titled Tier 4 Watch List, Q3 Review. He opened it, and his eyes froze on the screen. Not just him. Cynthia Valdez, Senior Logistics Analyst, Tier 4, flagged. He remembered Cynthia. Always wore red flats. Organized beyond belief. Disappeared 1 month before his stroke. Word was she took early retirement. That had been the official line. Samuel O'Reilly, Director of Risk Management, Tier 3, flagged. Samuel's office used to smell like cedar and peppermint gum. Brilliant mind. They told the team he left to consult independently. Gerald Watts, Accounts Receivable, Tier 4, Health Risk confirmed. Daniel's throat went dry. Gerald had collapsed in the parking garage one afternoon. Paramedics came. Then nothing. No updates. No farewell. He'd simply vanished. And now Daniel knew why. Each name was tagged with coded notes that read like euphemisms for execution. Prepare narrative for exit. Low resistance expected. Health monitoring initiated. The fury came slow and cold. Not the blinding kind that burns, but the quiet kind that hardens in your chest. He clicked on one more file. A compressed folder marked simply audio_meetings_Q4. Inside were recordings, planning meetings, roundtable sessions. He clicked on one and scrubbed through until a voice caught his ear. Smooth, measured, familiar. Lawrence Kane. We're seeing a slow trend in burnout-related disruptions. The Tier 4 list reflects that. If we act preemptively, we can avoid spikes in healthcare claims and downstream liability. Let's begin transition modeling before fiscal closes. Non-disciplinary framing is preferred. Daniel hit pause. Let's begin transition modeling. They were planning exits like product launches, removing human beings like defective inventory. He stared at the screen, hands trembling, not from the stroke this time, but from the clarity. There had been no accident, no miscommunication, no unfortunate HR error. They had seen him coming. His hours, his age, his blood pressure, his medical flags, and they had decided he was no longer worth the cost. He reached for his notebook and began writing names. Cynthia, Gerald, Samuel, others from the reports. A dozen in the first few minutes. He underlined each one, then added next to it, find out where they are. He wasn't sure what the plan was yet. But this list, this was the core of it. It wasn't revenge. Not anymore. It was revelation. He was going to show the world what had been done. Not just to him, but to all of them. He had been marked as a liability. A number in a cell. A red box on a risk report. But now he was about to become the problem they couldn't contain. The first time he said it out loud, it didn't sound like a declaration. It sounded like a question, half-formed, uncertain, the voice of a man still trying to catch up with the truth unraveling in front of him. What happens if a company tries to erase you while you're recovering from a stroke? He asked it during a phone consultation with a law office he'd found after 2 sleepless nights scrolling through labor rights websites and legal forums, still unsure whether he was overreacting or if, just maybe, he hadn't reacted enough. The woman on the other end of the line didn't answer right away. She listened, not in the way people wait for their turn to talk, but in that rare, intentional way, like she was measuring each breath of silence. Then she spoke, calm, clipped, professional. That depends, she said. Do you have proof? Daniel let out a dry laugh, almost a cough. Yeah, he said, glancing at the laptop screen still filled with folders of internal documents, audio files, planning charts, and a risk tier report that had quietly signed his professional death warrant. I've got proof. Then we need to talk. That's how he met Olivia Hart, labor attorney, employee rights specialist, and, within the next 48 hours, the first person who made him feel like he wasn't losing his mind. They met over a video call 2 days later. She appeared on the screen like she had been born inside a courtroom. Crisp navy blazer, hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun, glasses perched low enough to suggest she didn't need them for vision, only for clarity. There was no small talk, no soft entry, just a notepad in her hand and a directness Daniel hadn't realized how much he needed until it arrived. Walk me through everything, she said. Start from the stroke. So he did. He told her about the Zoom call, about the deadline that broke his body, about the silence, the locked badge, the email that arrived before he even regained consciousness. He told her about the ghosting, the HR department that vanished into smoke, the flash drive handed over in a whisper by a nurse with a look that said, I know how this ends. He showed her the reports, the tier system, the names. He even let her hear part of the recorded meeting where Lawrence Kane discussed transition modeling like he was shuffling spreadsheets, not people. She said very little as he spoke, scribbling in her notebook, occasionally pausing to tap something into her laptop. When he finally finished, when he exhaled everything he had been carrying for weeks, she looked back at him with eyes that didn't blink. You don't just have a case, she said. You have a blueprint. He frowned. A blueprint. She held up her notebook, a page already filled with bullet points. This isn't isolated, Daniel. It's not personal retaliation. It's systematic discrimination based on health status and, quite possibly, age. The tiered risk system, the language of quiet transition, the timing of that termination email, it's calculated. Legally, that's massive. If we can connect this system to decisions made at the executive level, it opens the door to more than just wrongful termination. It's class action territory. Daniel sat back, the breath catching in his chest. Not in fear, but in something close to hope. Fragile, flickering, but real. But, she added, we have to move smart. Quiet. If we go public too soon, they'll lock down everything. Shred files. Scrub metadata. Pretend you imagined all of it. He nodded. Then what do you need? I need to know who else on that list is still inside, Olivia said. We need a current witness. Someone who's seen this system in action recently. We don't build cases off shadows. We build them off patterns. Daniel didn't hesitate. He clicked back into the folder of names. His eyes landed on one that made his heart beat just a bit faster. Jenna Carlisle. She'd been his intern 5 years ago. Quiet, brilliant, anxious to prove herself. She still worked in HR analytics unless they'd moved her. The last time they spoke, she had sent him a file late one Friday with a note that simply read, "Because no one else will double-check this." He clicked into Slack, typed one sentence, just enough to let her know something was happening. "Jenna, it's Daniel. I'm looking into something important. Your name came up. Can we talk?" He hit send. No reply came that night. But something had shifted. The silence no longer felt like an end. It felt like a beginning. He had proof. He had a lawyer. And now, if he could find even one person still brave enough to say what they saw, he would have a movement. The message sat unanswered for nearly 18 hours. Slack showed it as delivered, but never read. Daniel stared at the tiny gray check mark like it was a heartbeat monitor, waiting for a blip, a flicker, anything to signal that someone out there still saw him. He told himself not to expect a response. Not now. Not with what he was asking. But Jenna Carlisle wasn't just a name in his past. She had been his intern, his project shadow, his extra set of eyes when nobody else cared enough to check the third decimal point on a risk tolerance model. She had stayed late without being asked, had once caught a compliance error that saved the company 6 figures. He remembered her as quiet, methodical, but principled in a way most people weren't anymore. So when a message arrived 19 hours and 16 minutes later, Daniel felt it before he saw it. His phone buzzed on the countertop. Just a single ping. Nothing else. The screen lit up. "Jenna, 2:47 p.m. I figured it was only a matter of time. They're already watching me. But I've saved what I could. Tell me what you need." Daniel sat motionless. Relief didn't come like a wave. It came like oxygen, slow and quiet, expanding gently in his lungs. He typed a reply with trembling fingers. "I need anything that proves they're still using the risk tier system. Real-time data. Screen grabs. Audio if possible. No names attached to you. Nothing that ties back." She replied in less than 5 minutes. "Jenna, 2:52 p.m. I pulled some logs before they started purging files. You'll get them in the next hour. No metadata, no trails. Encrypted. Don't contact me again after this unless I say it's safe." Daniel whispered the word, "damn." It wasn't just that she was willing to help. It was how she was helping. Clean, cautious, intentional. Somewhere along the line, Jenna Carlisle had become more than the girl he mentored. She had grown teeth. 43 minutes later, an encrypted email arrived in Daniel's inbox via a Proton Mail account with no name, no signature. Just one line in the body. "You're not crazy. I've seen what they're doing." Attached was a screenshot from Neurovalis's internal HRIS system, an interface Daniel knew all too well. Employee time tracking, status flags, risk assessments. The interface hadn't changed much since his tenure. But what had changed were the notes embedded under a single employee's profile. Retroactive adjustment applied to PTO record. Do not trigger absence protocol. Flagged for quiet transition. Daniel read it once. Then again. Those words, quiet transition, were identical to the phrasing from his own tier report. He hadn't imagined it. The company hadn't stopped the system after his departure. They had refined it, smoothed the language, hidden it in deeper menus. This was active, ongoing. Another file followed, a 10-second screen recording. It showed a cursor moving through the same dashboard, selecting a drop-down menu, and clicking an option labeled Flag for offboarding. Non-notified. It was done in under 3 clicks. No alert triggered. No email sent. Just a silent action inside the system. Daniel sat back in his chair, staring at the screen like it had grown teeth. It wasn't theory anymore. It was evidence. His phone buzzed again. Jenna, 3:51 p.m. That was for last week. I have more. Pulling logs before they wipe everything. But I'm next. And I can't be seen. Daniel's hands clenched. She was still inside, still walking those halls under flickering lights, still showing up at that building every morning with a smile. She had a fake in eyes that probably watched every hallway like a predator could be waiting at the next turn. He typed slowly, "Why are you doing this?" Her reply came almost instantly. Jenna, 3:53 p.m. Because you were the only one who looked me in the eye when I spoke. Daniel exhaled, his throat tight. He hadn't known she remembered that moment, hadn't even remembered it clearly himself. But it made sense now. In a place where voices were data points and faces were replaceable, that simple act of listening had mattered. It had planted something. He closed the laptop. The files Jenna sent were already backed up twice, once to the cloud, once to an encrypted drive he kept behind an old box of tax files. He wouldn't use her name, not even with Olivia. Jenna's safety came first. Her courage had lit the fuse. His job now was to carry the flame. Somewhere deep in his chest, past the anger and betrayal and weariness, something new began to settle in. It wasn't hope exactly. It was momentum. And soon, Neurovalis would feel it too. The weeks that followed blurred into a kind of rhythm. Slow mornings with shoulder stretches and bitter decough, afternoons buried in folders and legal briefs, and long, sleepless nights where every click of the laptop felt like another footstep towards something irreversible. Daniel West had never prepared for battle like this before. In the world he came from, battles were fought with spreadsheets, policy rewrites, and midnight emails full of redline revisions. But this was different. This was war, not against a competitor or a market shift, but against a system that had worn his face for years, one that had smiled at him while filing the paperwork to bury him. Olivia Hart, for her part, never once let the flame go dim. She called him daily, sometimes to strategize, sometimes to check his pulse, metaphorically and literally. She moved like a surgeon, fast, focused, and unsentimental. She never coddled him, never fed his anger. She didn't have to. She knew what they were building together wasn't about rage. It was about precision. By the end of week 3, they had 15 names. 15 former employees, flagged in the same reports as Daniel, tier 3 or 4. All let go within the same 2 fiscal quarters. All following documented health incidents. None with formal reviews. None with exit interviews. All quietly transitioned. Some with minimal severance. Some with none at all. Daniel had kept notes on each one. When they left, what departments they worked in, what rumors were whispered at the time. Olivia cross-referenced each name with company records, LinkedIn timelines, and press releases. They formed a mosaic, painfully symmetrical. The same narrative repeated like a broken loop. Cynthia, the logistics analyst, had reportedly taken early retirement after fainting in a vendor call and being denied time off. Samuel, in risk, had requested ergonomic accommodations after stress-induced hypertension. Denied. Then replaced. Gerald had collapsed in the parking garage. His family never received a single follow-up. Each case came with its own quiet wound. But together, they formed a pattern. And patterns were evidence. Still, it wasn't enough to file. Not yet. 5 corroborated cases with direct ties to executive-level decisions. Olivia said over one of their late calls. That's what we need to unlock subpoena power. With that, we can go after emails, Slack archives, even personnel policy updates hidden behind encryption. Daniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing the side of his temple. We already have enough. The audio files, the reports. We have context, she interrupted. We need irrefutable connection. That's when Jenna sent the final file. It arrived late on a Sunday night, buried in a chain of encrypted exchanges. No subject line, no signature, just a single PDF. A recording transcript from a Q4 staffing call, dated 3 weeks before Daniel's stroke. One voice stood out, Lawrence Kane, the CEO himself. Begin transition modeling for Tier 4 employees. Non-disciplinary. Use health protocol flags. No direct notifications. Let the system ease them out. Daniel didn't move for a full minute after reading it. Not even to breathe. It was there. His voice. His intent. Clear. Undeniable. He forwarded the file to Olivia with a single line. "This is it," she called the next morning. Her voice, usually composed, had an edge now. Not excitement, control. The sound of someone pulling the pin from a grenade they had been holding for weeks. "We file next week," she said. "Class action. Wrongful termination. Health-based discrimination. Willful negligence. And if the court sees it our way, personal liability for the executive decisions made under expired federal compliance policies." Daniel said nothing, just nodded slowly. He thought of the badge that didn't beep, the silence that followed, the weight of the email that came too soon, the list of names, the voices that had vanished one by one. They were coming back now, not as ghosts, but as a reckoning. And this time they had a name, a plan, and a courtroom waiting. The courtroom was colder than it had any right to be. Not from the weather, though outside, Chicago's January wind bit through every coat and scarf, but from the sterile hum of the air vents and the pale gray walls that made everything inside feel muted. The carpet was clean but dull, the lighting fluorescent and clinical. The kind of place where truth didn't roar, it whispered carefully through procedure. Daniel West sat at the plaintiff's table, spine straight but not stiff, hands folded tightly in his lap. Beside him, Olivia Hart rifled through a thick binder of exhibits. Her calmness wasn't an act, it was weaponized. Years of courtroom wars had shaped her presence into something surgical. No panic, no flourish, just facts shaped like blades. Across the room sat Lawrence Kane. Daniel recognized the cut of his suit before he saw the man himself. Custom-tailored, slate gray, subtly arrogant. Kane sat leaned slightly back in his chair, one ankle resting over the opposite knee like he was attending a shareholders' luncheon, not facing a potential personal liability verdict. No paperwork in front of him. No laptop. Just him and his lawyer. And that faint, familiar smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. The same one Daniel had seen during every quarterly review, every budget cut discussion, every time someone dared challenge the pressure cooker Kane had made of the workplace. He didn't even look at Daniel. But Daniel saw him. All of him. The man who once demanded a compliance model at 10 p.m. The man who terminated careers with phrases like alignment, adjustment. The man who watched people burn out and chalked it up as operational variance. He would see Daniel before this was over. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered. Federal Circuit Court, Honorable R. Melanie Torres, sharp as glass and known to be merciless with wasted time. Opening statements were brief. The facts were not disputed. Daniel's stroke occurred during work hours. He had been terminated via email less than 30 minutes later. No performance warning had preceded the message. Neurovalis's internal policies on health accommodation had expired and were never renewed post-merger. The defense spun the termination as procedural, unfortunate timing, a lapse in internal communication. But then Olivia stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't pace. She didn't even look at Kane. Instead, she turned to the jury, 12 strangers who would decide whether Daniel's life was worth more than a checkbox. This case, she began, is not about a single employee. It's about a system. One built to extract maximum output, then discard the people who fall behind. It is about deliberate neglect disguised as policy. And today we will show you, through their own language, their own documents, their own voices, how that system was designed, implemented, and weaponized. Then she nodded toward Daniel. He stood slowly. The courtroom quieted. He walked to the center display, a simple projector screen and a remote in his hand. Click. Slide 1. A scan of his hospital intake report, time-stamped 7:04 p.m., the night of the stroke. Click. Slide 2. The termination email from HR, 6:47 p.m., 15 minutes before the hospital recorded his arrival. Click. Slide 3. The Tier 4 risk assessment report, highlighting his employee ID, insurance tier, and the note, "Evaluate exit strategy if workload impact continues." The jury shifted in their seats. A woman in the third row blinked hard. Daniel turned slowly toward Kane. Their eyes met for the first time. No more Zoom windows. No more power dynamics. Just one man staring down another in front of 12 witnesses and a federal judge. Then Daniel reached into the file Olivia handed him and pulled out a printout. His brain scan, taken 47 minutes after he collapsed. He held it up in silence. "This is my brain," he said, voice calm but steady. "Right after I told my CEO we couldn't meet the deadline without breaking people. And then I broke." He looked at the jury again. "Is this what made me disposable?" No one answered. No one had to. Daniel returned to his seat. His hands didn't tremble this time. Olivia leaned in close and whispered, "We just landed the first punch." Across the room, Kane finally shifted in his chair. His smirk was gone. The second day of the trial began with a different air in the courtroom. Kane's defense team huddled closer now, no longer lounging in easy posture. The documents from Jenna had been entered into the record under the protection of an anonymous whistleblower. The footage showing internal overrides, triggering off-boarding flags without employee notice, had been authenticated. Olivia presented it cleanly, no dramatics, just precision. Then came the moment that cracked everything open. She stood, steady as ever, and addressed the jury with two simple exhibits. "Exhibit 43, she said, gesturing to the screen, is a screen recording from Neurovalis's HR dashboard, timestamped 2 weeks before Mr. West's termination. Note the drop-down field marked quiet transition health flag. Now observe how this status was applied manually, without employee notification, without HR review." The room was silent, save for the sound of mouse clicks on video. "Exhibit 44, she continued, is a scanned internal memo titled Tier 4s to Watch, Q3. It lists 47 employees flagged for insurance burden. In the margin of one case, under Mr. West's name, it reads, quote, minimize exposure before incident becomes visible." Daniel watched the jurors closely. That line landed like thunder behind glass. This wasn't just a legal case anymore. It was a moral reckoning, and Kane knew it. He sat upright now, hands finally moving, taking notes, whispering furiously to his attorney. The arrogance had curdled into calculation. It was too late. Olivia delivered the final blow with surgical calm. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, "this was not negligence. It was architecture." When the judge called recess, Olivia leaned over and whispered to Daniel, "He's done." He didn't answer, just stared ahead, jaw tight, heart steady. No anger, just clarity. The verdict came 3 days later. Guilty of wrongful termination. Guilty of health-based discrimination. Guilty of deliberate negligence under federal labor compliance statutes. But the final line was the one that echoed across the entire courtroom. Personal liability judgment, $74 million to be paid by Lawrence Kane. Not Neurovalis. Not shareholders. Him. No gasps. No outbursts. Just a silence heavy enough to crush. Daniel didn't cheer. Didn't cry. He just breathed. For the first time in months, deeply and without fear. In the months that followed, the aftermath rolled in like a quiet storm. 3 board members resigned. The HR division was gutted. Regulatory probes opened in 2 states. The press latched on quickly. Stroke victim exposes corporate health discrimination scandal. But Daniel stayed mostly silent. Until one day, he registered something new. A nonprofit. The Rachel Clause, named after the woman who collapsed, got an email, and decided not to vanish. It offered legal aid to workers who were punished for being human. It started small. 1 attorney, 1 caseworker, a folder full of names uncovered during discovery. By the end of the first month, they had 62 applicants. By the end of the year, they had changed laws in 2 states. Daniel never returned to corporate life. His left hand still trembled every morning. On rainy days, the shoulder burned. He drank his coffee slower now, watched the sun rise instead of rushing through it. But he kept one thing in a drawer, folded, not framed. His brain scan, not as a symbol of weakness, but as a receipt. Because some scars don't go away. But some wounds? They demand to be seen.